now we can get started. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's Jose here, welcoming you to another episode of Amazing Worlds, where today I am going to be discussing the novel Elric of Melnibone by Michael Moorcock. Now, I read this one on the old Kindle, new Kindle, I don't know why I say old, but my Kindle. But I won't be discussing so much how I felt reading it on the Kindle. It was fine, it was easy, didn't detract. My first ever book I read on the Kindle, but yeah, it was alright. I can see myself continuing with the ebooks thing. Now, Michael Moorcock, British author, relocated to Texas, started in the editing business at the tender age of 25, editing fiction, science fiction magazines in the UK, and eventually very prolific author, has written tons and tons of novels based around the idea of the eternal champion, of which Elric of Melnibone is one of those impersonations. Now, I had to do quite a bit of reading, I had to do a bit of researching because I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of the eternal champion and this whole multiverse thing. It's all a bit out there, you know. I mean, the first ever Elric novella was written, published in 1961, and then there were a series of them. But chronologically, if you want to dive into the world of Elric, the place to start is the one I've read, the 1972 Elric of Melnibone, which predates all the others. And I'm not going to do a reading guide here or anything like that yet. I'm just going to discuss the first novel. But anyway, back to the point about the eternal champion. So this is the 60s. I mean, Moorcock must have been on something, because this predates anything that Brent Weeks or Brandon Sanderson are doing with the Cosmere, and wherever Brent Weeks is doing his own thing. So the whole idea of parallel, multi-layer universes where there is an appointed champion, an eternal champion, who aims to balance out law and chaos. And whether the setting is some medieval fantasy or cyberpunk or urban, post-apocalyptic, whatever, there is always some eternal champion in Moorcock's novels that deals with this sort of thing. And apparently they do appear in each other's novels and stuff like that. So it's all a bit, it's a bit out there. I mean, it does require a certain element of mental abstraction. But anyway, so Elric of Melnibone presents us with Elric, who is the emperor / prince of the Melniboneans, a once mighty, they're not quite human, so people that rule the world, but over the centuries they've seen the power get corrupt, lost, and now they are just a tiny island surrounded by less developed but opposing nations of humans. And Elric is the prince. He's a very weak character. He needs drugs to keep his body going. He's an albino. It is very, very much the anti-hero thing. And basically, you know, if the whole setting of the multiverse wasn't nutty enough, Elric is in love with his cousin Simoril, the girl, who is also fancied by Yurkun, who is Simoril's brother, incestuous here, who opposes Elric, so he's the antagonist. And basically he kidnaps Simoril, and Elric makes a pact with some overlords, deities of chaos, to rescue Simoril, and obtains the sentient sword Stormbringer. which I don't think has got anything to do with the Deep Purple song, but maybe it does. I don't know. Now, the novel is very short, but it packs a lot of action. I think very much a product of its time. This is plot of a character. It's very plot driven, and I don't know exactly the page count because I read it on the Kindle, but it's not a very long novel, but possibly a lot happens or more than it does in current day novels that would maybe take 600 pages or 700 pages to tell the same story. Now that's both a positive and a negative. It's a positive because the action keeps going, you get sucked into the story, you read, you go through, but we are lacking a little bit in world building, we are lacking a little bit in setting, we are lacking in character development. But the writing is fairly simple. I don't think there was anything demanding there, reading wise. The fantasy elements are massive here. So we've got sentient swords, we've got gods, we've got elementals, forces of nature, so kind of Dungeons and Dragons type thing, but 20 years before Dungeons and Dragons. We have other dimensional traveling and stuff like that, but it's not overly demanding to get into. There were a couple of things in the novel that made me, they were a bit cringy and they put me off a little bit, but the novels are so short that I will continue reading Elric in between bigger books or something like that. Certainly they're very cheap on the Kindle. But there's a particular moment when Elric rallies his troops because in between all this kidnapping of his loved one and everything, warring nations arrive, and I think there was some kind of god that on site, Medusa style, would petrify or kill his forces or whatever. So he enlists an army of blind people to fight for him. Blind people, blind soldiers fighting by sound. And he wins the day. Now, again, it's one of those things where I would buy into the chaos gods, the sentient swords, the ships that sail on land and sea. I would buy all of that stuff, but I'm not willing to buy blind soldiers winning a battle. It's one of those things. It's just that it's almost like very childish fantasy, and I couldn't help but feeling that throughout the novel. The tone is a bit childish, a bit immature, and every so often in the pages you get a drawing, you get a picture, it's a slight scene there, representing a scene in there, and that just reminds me of those kind of kiddies books, little kids books that I used to read as a child. It reminded me of The Nutcracker by E.T. Hoffman, I think. So there's an element of, approach it with a bit of caution. So all in all, and considering the time this was written, it was very much against the grain of traditional fantasy. I mean, by time period, this should have been a classical fantasy tale of good versus evil, and in a sense, Yukun, the antagonist, is evil, but Elric is not almighty goody, he's not shy of using torture. He's a fairly amoral guy. I mean, he wants to marry his cousin again. So this is all a little bit grim, darkish, 40 years before everything else. So there's a huge element of innovation here, and this is only think it was what, 10 years to 20 years, 10 years after Lord of the Rings, and it's certainly not Lord of the Rings. In fact, Michael Moorcock wasn't very friendly towards Lord of the Rings. So, not going to, in my opinion, not going to rock anyone's boat. Certainly a big ask to dive into the whole Moorcock's multiverse, because there's a lot of stuff there, and I'm certainly not going to be doing that. I don't recommend anyone does that based on the one book I've read. But stay tuned, because I might pick up one or two more at some point, hopefully this year, and I'll let you know. If you are well read in the genre and you haven't had a look at Elric, give it a try, because it's very different from anything else you've ever read, I'm daring to say. But anyway, this is all I've got for today. I would like to thank you all, as usual, for liking, disliking when you comment, subscribing, and I just want to remind you all to take loads and loads of care as usual. This might be my last video in a couple of weeks, because finally I think we're going to go away on holidays for a bit, so I might try to take some time off. But take lots of care, and I'll see you next time. Bye!